Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael, and welcome to this lesson in this video about learning at higher level. One of the fundamental questions that we want to ask ourselves: what is different in the current learning system or in the current education system that you're experiencing, even as a country? What's different? Is it not the same age-long habits, a know-it-all teacher, and an empty-headed student? That is what we have been emphasizing, that our education system is paying attention only to the teacher, that when there is no teacher, learning cannot continue, that learning depends on what a teacher has to do. Teacher gives out the notes, teacher gives out instructions, that without the role of the teacher or without the teacher, we cannot be able to learn. And I'll give you this simple scenario that you can even take. For instance, when we were in most of our high schools, what could happen when you see the deputy principal coming? That is the time we'll realize that we are out of the classes and we'll want to run in so that we could be able to go and read. And some of us, even when in class, we still make noise until the teacher on duty appears. That's when the time we'll get out our books from the lockers. And some of them perhaps might be upside down. So it is the kind of education system that was emphasizing about the teacher, that the teacher has to be there for students to be able to learn. But do you think we still need to continue that way? Do you think we still need to move in that kind of scenario? You just did a reflection activity about experience in learning, and some of these questions you've been able to answer. Like, how did we learn in primary and secondary schools? Can we remember what we learned in primary and secondary? What can help you? What helped you to be able to remember what you learned in primary and in secondary? What would you say was the purpose of learning at lower levels? Lower level meaning in the primary level or even in the secondary level. What do you think was the primary? What was the purpose of you learning at that particular time? Now that you are in a college, or now that you are in an institution of higher learning like North Coast Medical Training College, the aim of this kind of education that you're giving you is to be able to turn you as a student into tomorrow's professional. That is the aim as to why you are in an institution of higher learning. You're not learning here today so that tomorrow perhaps you enroll in the best university. No, maybe you might go for further studies. But what is the aim as to why you are in school today, and particularly why you are in North Coast as an institution of higher learning, is so that you can be transformed from being a student into a professional. And which type of professional are we talking about? North Coast is a medical college, therefore we are training healthcare professions. But the question would be, how do we do that? How do we transform you as a student into tomorrow's profession? It is by applying proven scientific theories of teaching and learning as advanced by psychologists, sociologists, development practitioners, educationists, and all the other relevant people who have come up with proven methods, proven ways, proven theories that can be able to support that kind of learning. We've just done activity or rather an assignment on learning approaches. We've checked about how learning took place according to some of the education scholars, people like John Dewey, people like Benjamin Bloom, people like B.F. Skinner, people like Lev Vygotsky, people like Jean Piaget. So we know how learning took place according to their time. And those are the scientific method, those are the proven theories that tries to address some of the education system that our education system in Kenya is lacking. Take an example of that icebreaker. What can you be able to tell? What can you perhaps tell from that icebreaker? This guy has a cape which can help him to shield from the sun. This guy has a goggles no, not Google, but goggles or specs or shades, we might call them that way. But then they are nicely put on his vest, and then he's trying to shield his eyes from maybe the intensity of the light, whereas he has the resources. Ladies and gentlemen, when you hear that Kenya is a third world country, it's not that we lack resources. We have the resources, and we can confirm from that that we are a country that is self-sustainable and we have enough resources. But it is the kind of education system that is now leading us to an extent of not believing that we have resources that we can operate with. And that's why that when life gives you all the tools of success, but you're still determined to fail. Ladies and gentlemen, now you are finding yourself in a competence-based environment whereby we are eclectically addressing the issues of education that are going to help us achieve our vision 2030 and beyond. And we have the resources. The issue is, how do we come in with an education system that can help us make use of the little resources that we have to be able to address the education systems? Now, these theories that we've been learning, the behaviorist theory, cognitivist theory, constructivist theory, in addition to all the education scholars that I just mentioned before, they are helping us to transform to a kind of education that is student centered, to a kind of education that is competence based, to a kind of education that you're not emphasizing on a teacher as the main item or as the main branch of learning. And therefore, we need to be able to create an education environment or an education system environment that is embracing the theories of teaching and that of learning. And when we are saying we are emphasizing on the theories of teaching and that of learning, what do we mean? Like, for instance, we are in the 21st century. So, in terms of the age practice, what we have been experiencing is what we're calling traditional or conventional type of learning, whereby it was about the teacher, the teacher come to class. When there is no teacher, we are happy. We see that on the timetable, maybe it is time for mathematics, and the mathematics teacher is not there. We feel happy. So the age-old practice, that was a traditional kind of education, or what we're calling a conventional education. And now we're talking about in 21st century, we are focusing about the modern type of education or the modernized education. So the method that was there initially was called traditional or conventional method, but now we are focusing on the counter method, which is the modern way of learning. The emphasis on the on the on the traditional way of learning was knowledge based. Like, we want to give people more knowledge. So it's about knowledge. It was knowledge based. Like, you need to learn just the theory part of it. But in a modern kind of environment or in a counter method to that, we're talking about competency based methodology or competency based learning. And in competence based learning, as we define in class, we are emphasizing on the student having the right knowledge. We are emphasizing the student to have the necessary skills to accompany that knowledge, and we are emphasizing on students to have the right attitude and be able to have the experience. That is, to practice, to have the experience. What is the focus of traditional or conventional method of learning? It is teacher centered. Like, it is the teacher who runs the learning. Without a teacher, people will not be in class. Without a teacher standing there with a cane, people will not be able to sit down and learn. Without a teacher, people will never be able to submit assignment. But in modern way of learning, we are emphasizing on student centered, that it is the student who drives learning. It is the student who is in a position to be able to plan his or her own learning. In terms of outcome, curriculum based, and that's why you will hear the issues like, we did not finish curriculum, that is the reason why we failed. We did not finish curriculum, and that's why we were not able to perform where we expected to perform. But now, in a modern way of learning, we are emphasizing on outcome based. And the North Coast, of course, we are having what we're calling outcomes. What do we want you to learn from this topic? That is the outcome. Like we are doing scholarly skills. What is the outcome for this unit? Is that so that you can be able to demonstrate competency in scholarly skills such as effective reading, effective writing, be able to, you know, understand how learning philosophy North Coast happens, and that is a competency based kind of environment. So, what's the outcome for you to be able to demonstrate what? And the starting point in a traditional or a conventional education was a problem based. Like a teacher will come to class and then say, okay, today we're going to learn about mathematics linear programming equation. And the teacher gives you an example and then tells you, now, can you go and work out? So they give you a problem or they give you an assignment which you're going to do. And now, in a solution based type of education or type of environment, is whereby we are asking students to give us solutions to the problem. How do we bring up the solutions to the challenges? Yeah. So once you've been given a problem, how are you able to come up with solutions for that so that you can be able to see how you're faring on and how you're using education to be able to solve problems? Because the world today is lacking problem solvers. We have a lot of problems in the world, but we are lacking people who will bring up the solutions to that problem. And for the sociological point of view, the traditional method is emphasizing on individual learning, that everybody for himself and God for us all. But when we talk about the 21st century, where the type of the modern education, we're emphasizing on social or group or cooperative learning, group dynamics, and that's why we took enough time to take you through the principles of group dynamics. Very, very much important that we emphasize that students are able to learn. Like we did constructivist type of learning theory. So you learn from each other by activating your prior knowledge. You need to be able to learn within a group, to interact, so that you can be able to learn very well. And from the psychological point of view, the conventional education emphasizes on cognitive learning, which emphasizes on memory, which emphasizing on cramming, sorry, which emphasizes on how much can you regurgitate, how much do you have in your upstairs or in your brain. But in modern education, we are emphasizing on psychomotor learning, whereby we need you to be able to use your hands, the psychomotor, the hands-on approach. You remember the John Dewey's style of learning, the role of pragmatism or hands-on approach is once you've been able to learn, how do you use that knowledge that you have to be able to practice? That is the psychomotor learning. Psychomotor meaning hands-on approach to put into practice the knowledge that you have, putting it into use. Now, ladies and gentlemen, teaching in a competency based is very entertaining, very practical, and that is the reason why even the Kenyan government now we are talking about changing our learning approach from the traditional one or from the knowledge centered or from the teacher centered to what you're calling a CBC. And I think we've even seen a lot of jokes happening on the WhatsApp about how CBC is being enrolled out in Kenya. Now, this is the center. This is the epicenter. North Coast is the only college that it began with this in mind, that we began our colleges, we opened our doors on competency based platform. And therefore, for the last 7 years, we've been improving. We've been, kind of shaping to be able to hit the target. We are not saying that we are there, but we are every day improving to be able to see that we address all areas of competence or all areas of CBET kind of education. Now, teaching can either be of two coins. When you have a coin, the previous ones we used to have the head um, and the logo of the lion, or that symbol of lion. So you could say the head and the tail, maybe. But now let's look at it teaching in two ways. Like we can have traditional way or the knowledge based or the teacher centered one. Whereas we have the modern way, the competence based. So teaching has a two sides of coin. In traditional or in a teacher-centered kind of teaching, it focuses on the subjects and the theory. And that's why here we'll be able to ensure that students are finishing the syllabus. Ladies and gentlemen, there is more than finishing a syllabus, but how much can we be able to focus on the professional tasks or the competencies that you can be able to apply the theory? So in a teacher-centered, we emphasize on clearing the subjects or finishing the syllabus or being able to do the theory. But in a student-centered kind of environment, we are focusing on the competencies that you need to have the knowledge, you need to have the skills, you need to have the right attitude. In teacher-centered, there was teacher as a focal point and student-centered, student as a focal point. These two are where the focal point is. Now, for the teacher-centered, we are talking about the teacher drives learning. Without a teacher, there's no learning. But in a student, as a student centered, student is the focal point. So it is you as a student who drives your own learning. In student centered environment, it focuses on student learning goals or outcomes, as we said, and students take responsibility for their own learning, as opposed to a teacher centered whereby it emphasizes on goals, teacher responsible for student learning. Now, in student centered, in terms of the assessment, we're having what we're calling formative assessments are integrated component of learning. That basically means that we are assessing you at every stage of learning, not summative assessment whereby we can now expose you to end of term exam or an end of year exam that now you've been able to learn for the whole 5 years and then we want to assess you. No, like what used to happen in KCPE, that we learn for 8 years and then we are assessed, and that one determines whether we have passed or failed. And then in student-centered learning, there is immediate feedback, and that feedback is also a rich feedback, as compared to teacher-centered, whereby there is little and feedback is always late. And then in student-centered environment, interaction between the teacher and students is high, and there's a lot of asking questions. And that one we also experience that because North Coast we have mentors who are always with you. We're having teachers, we're having lecturers who always come to be able to have time with you, do discussions and all that, and even to conduct tutorials. In student-centered learning, we are emphasizing on learning, training, and developing. Whereas in teacher-centered, we emphasize on teaching. That's the difference. Here we are doing training, learning, and developing. That is what we are doing. That's why it's called North Coast Medical Training College, but not North Coast Medical Teaching College. So it's a training college, and we have to train you. Now, is it possible, or is there a need for us to change from the traditional one to the modern way of learning? Do you think it is possible based on the evidence and the and the theories that we've just shared with you? Do you think that it is possible for us to be able to bring a change? And when I talk about a change, I mean moving from the traditional way of learning to the modern way of learning. Do you think that is realistic? Now, there is a statement by John Dewey saying that true learning is based on discovery, guided by student interest and mentoring, rather than transmission of knowledge. You see, when we are in a teacher centered, it's the teacher who is giving out everything. So it's the teacher who is learning, actually, because teacher is actively involved, whereas the students are passively involved. So it is very possible that we can change from the traditional modern to the traditional way to the modern way. Take for instance, when the cars began, we did not have this type of car. We have different types of car, but with the time it has developed until we're having the latest brand of vehicles or cars in town. So if that one has been able to transform, why not education? Look at the computers. We began with computers that a computer was a very big machine that we could have been placed in one room. But currently we have the smallest computers like our phones. our tablets and their computers and we walk around with them. So it is even possible that we can change from the traditional methods to modern way of learning. That is very possible. Now, Dewey is saying that that a true learning is supposed to be based on discovery. And how do we discover? When the student innovate, like constructivist approach, we ask you to be able to go and activate your prior knowledge, and by that you can discover. That is what John Dewey said. Now, the need for education change is that new skills need to be learned, what we are calling the soft skills. And these are oftenly poorly developed. The soft skills, these are the skills that helps you to interact. These are the skills that helps you to bring out your leadership management. These are the skills that, they are intangible skills, but helps you in your process of learning and as you acquire your professional competencies so that you can be able to work. Because everybody nowadays in the era of digital world, everybody can Google the theory that they want. Everybody can Google all the knowledge that they want. But it is the soft skills that will differentiate you from what you're having. So because of advancement of science coupled with the explosion of knowledge, a curriculum can no longer be rigid. That means that it has to be dynamic. It has to keep on changing because knowledge turnover is very high in the current digital age. There is a lot of knowledge everywhere. You can Google, you can get it anywhere. There is quite a lot of knowledge. Now, the cognitive theories of learning presupposes that learning is an active process rather than a passive one. So it involves transfer of information as follows: that you perceive your knowledge through your senses, and you can perceive it through your eyesight or through your eyes, those who learn by seeing; through your ears, those who learn by hearing; through sensing or touching, those who are kinesthetic kind of learners; and all those forms through nose. You perceive different ways. Once you perceive those perceptions, they go into a short-term memory. Now, to ensure that the knowledge is not lost, because some of the things that we put them in a short-term memory, they can easily get lost. But we need to transfer them to a long-term memory. How do we do that? Is by rehearsing. You remember Lev Vygotsky talked about the aspect of rehearsing. So when he emphasized about rehearsing, is about you doing the same thing with the same knowledge, making use of your knowledge several times until it goes to the long-term memory. Like for instance, you've just sat in this Karisawanje building for a while. How many motorbikes so far can you say that have passed? Can you recall? No. Why? Because you did not pay attention to that and you did not want to focus on that. But let me ask you, you have your mom's phone number offhand. What could have been happening? You have been rehearsing that number several times. That's why it is on a long-term memory and you cannot forget it. And anything that we put in a long-term memory, we cannot forget it. So the role of the education system is to turn today's student into tomorrow's profession. Now, when you become a profession, you will not forget the information that you've learned, even beginning from now. And that's why we keep on emphasizing about you rehearsing the knowledge. Ladies and gentlemen, the knowledge that has no practice, the knowledge that you cannot practice, is a useless knowledge. So ensure that you find means to practice your knowledge so that it can remain in the long-term memory. We have some facts about active learning. That real learning takes place when new information is transferred from short-term memory to long-term memory and subsequently can be retrieved as an output in a practical situation that calls for application of that particular knowledge. Take, for instance, we've trained you about hand washing. When we want to go and eat, we need to hand wash. So can you retrieve that information and apply it on how you wash? Don't just wash hands anyhow, but we've taught you how to hand wash properly. So take use of that and take note of that. Anytime you need to wash your hands, you need to remember that there are 7 steps of hand washing. Another fact is that new information must be associated with information already in memory. Otherwise, loose facts or telephone numbers tend to be forgotten quickly. Why? Because we do not have an association of that information that we have in our memory. And this is the aim whereby we are emphasizing on activating the prior knowledge. Ladies and gentlemen, your mind is not tabula rasa, it's not an empty slate. So you have a lot of information, but how do you attach that information that you have to the relevant one that you are learning so that it can make meaning? in you. Then proper activation of prior knowledge facilitates the acquisition and recall of new information. We've been talking about you perceiving the information. So you perceive information from the environment through seeing, feeling, hearing, smelling, and tasting. These are the sensations that you have. Information is recorded in short-term memory as you can see it. Some of these loose facts will be given out. You will lose them, like how many motorbikes have just passed, or how many chairs do you have in this class, can just easily go away because you do not attach meaning to it or give attention to that. And then now we are having a working memory whereby you need to keep on retrieving the information and saving it in the file or schema, the one that we are seeing here. This is the long-term memory. And you can always activate this by bringing it to short-term by through past experiences and also experiencing and feeling it. Like for instance, if you see a snake today, what will come into your mind? You'll perhaps run. Why? Because you've encountered a snake or you've even seen a snake, how it behaves. So you can always activate that information and work on it and be able to see that it serves the purpose that you require. So our brain is like a schema. It keeps the information in shelves. Now, you need to always retrieve that information. Otherwise, if you leave this information also in shelves, tapigwa na vumbi. Mhm. Yes, that you can easily forget. You know, you can go to a library and start looking for a book. A whole 30 minutes you're looking for a book. It's because you've not been strategically placed to be able to keep on reminding you where the book is. So you need to keep on retrieving the files in your brain, bringing them to working table, and bringing them back again for storage. That is very good. Now, I want to finish up with giving you the retention level of learning. Scientists say, because everything we are doing here is a proven theory, and scientists do say that we only retain 10% of what we read. So if you just sit down and read, ladies and gentlemen, at the end, if I happen to give you an exam, you'll only retain 10% of what you've learned. And then we retain only 20% of what we hear. So just by hearing, you only retain 20%. And that is why sometimes we normally say that coming to class to give a lecture might not be the best way to teach. Because at the end of giving a 2 hour, a 3 hour lecture, you'll only have gotten 20%. But also, when you see, you retain 30%. When you just see, you retain 30%. But when you see and hear, you retain 50%. So by seeing and by hearing, you gain 20%. This is just to help you know the diverse methods of learning. And then we retain 70% of what we've discussed with others. When you go a step ahead to discuss with others, you retain 70%. Consequently, you retain 80% of what you've experienced personally. Personal experience. No wonder we say experience is the best teacher, but there is also another step. You retain 95% and and over of what you can be able to explain to others. So 95% of what you explain to others. And that is why the reason why we normally say that teachers wameiva or they have the knowledge is because every year, every day in they teach the same thing and they're able to explain to other students. You know, by the fact that I can explain this fact to you until you understand it means that I'm also understanding it better. So that's why we're emphasizing on group work. We're emphasizing on team learning and team teaching. I'll finish this by saying that show me, I will forget. In tell me, I will forget. Show me, I will remember. Involve me, I will understand. I repeat again. Tell me, and I will forget. Show me, I will remember. And involve me, and I will understand. So, ladies and gentlemen, the kind of education system we are exposing you to North Coast is the one that we are involving you so that you can be able to understand. Thank you so much for listening. If there is any question, you can post our comments on the YouTube or even meet us in class and be able to ask the question. Thank you so much for taking